The final battle, an alternative ending. The dust settled on the battlefield of the Salarius River. Crassus stood victorious among thousands of fallen rebels. But one body was missing, the body of Spartacus. In the chaos of the final charge, 3 loyal gladiators had formed a human shield around their leader. They fell, one by one, buying precious seconds. Seconds that changed history. A spear had pierced Spartacus's thigh. Blood poured from a dozen wounds, but he was alive. His men dragged him through the corpses, disguised as another fallen rebel. Roman soldiers walked past him, looking for their greatest prize. They never found it. By nightfall, Spartacus was hidden in a shepherd's cave in the mountains of southern Italy. Fever consumed him for 3 days. His wounds festered. Death waited at his bedside like an old friend. But Spartacus was not ready to die. He had seen too much, learned too much. The rebellion had failed, but the idea could not be killed with swords. When he could finally stand, only 50 men remained with him. 50 out of 70,000. The Roman Republic had crucified 6,000 rebels along the Appian Way. Their screams echoed for miles, a warning to anyone who dared dream of freedom. Spartacus looked at his broken army and made a decision that would echo through centuries. They would not fight Rome again. They would become something more dangerous. They would become a whisper in the dark. The seeds of revolution. The group split into smaller cells. Each man took a different path. Some went to Greece, others to Egypt. A few brave souls stayed in Italy itself, hiding in plain sight. Spartacus sailed to Alexandria with 10 men. He changed his name, grew his beard, walked with a limp that was not entirely an act. He became a teacher of rhetoric and philosophy in the great library. But he was not just teaching the children of merchants and priests. In the shadows, he'd gathered slaves, literate slaves, educated slaves, those who could read and write and think. He taught them something revolutionary. He taught them that slavery was not natural. That no man was born to wear chains. That the gods, if they existed, had created all men equal. These ideas spread like wildfire and oil, from Alexandria to Athens, from Athens to Carthage, from Carthage back to Rome itself. Spartacus wrote under different names. He created texts that would be copied and shared in secret for generations. His words were simple but powerful. Freedom is not given, it is taken. Not with swords alone, but with minds awakened. The long game. 20 years passed. Spartacus was now in his 50s. His body bore the scars of 1,000 battles. His hair had turned white, but his eyes still burned with the same fire. The Roman Republic was changing. Internal conflicts grew stronger. Julius Caesar was rising to power. And everywhere, in the shadows, Spartacus's students were working. They were scribes who altered documents, merchants who funded underground networks, teachers who planted questions in young minds, priests who reinterpreted sacred texts to condemn slavery. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, Spartacus saw his moment. He sent messages to his network across the empire, not to rebel openly, but to sabotage, to slow down, to make slavery economically unsustainable. Ships carrying slaves mysteriously sank. Slave markets burned under mysterious circumstances. Rebellious slaves found escape routes that should not have existed. The cost of maintaining slavery began to exceed its benefits in certain regions. Some wealthy Romans, influenced by Spartacus's philosophical texts, began to question the morality of the system. The final victory. Spartacus died at the age of 68, not in battle, but in his sleep, in a small house in Athens. Only a handful of people attended his funeral. The world did not know that one of history's greatest revolutionaries had just passed. But his legacy was just beginning. His students had students. His ideas had taken root. The underground network he created continued to grow. It became part of early Christian communities who also preached equality before God. When Rome finally fell, it was not just because of barbarian invasions. It was because the empire had rotted from within. The slave economy that built Rome became its greatest weakness. Alternative historians would later argue that Spartacus's survival changed the timeline of slavery itself. That his ideas, spreading quietly for centuries, made the institution unsustainable earlier than it would have been otherwise. The echo through time. By the Middle Ages, Spartacus had become a legend. Most people thought he died on that battlefield in 71 BC. But in secret societies across Europe, the truth was whispered. The truth that he had survived and planted seeds of freedom. These societies preserved his writings. They added to them. They created a philosophy of resistance that influenced peasant revolts, religious reformations, and eventually modern democratic movements. When Thomas Jefferson wrote about equality in 1776, he was echoing ideas that had traveled through 2,000 years, ideas that could be traced back to a Thracian gladiator who refused to die when Rome demanded it. When slaves rebelled in Haiti of 1791, their leaders invoked the name of Spartacus. When Abraham Lincoln ended slavery in America, scholars noted the strange philosophical lineage that connected ancient Rome to modern abolition. The price of survival. But survival came with a cost that Spartacus carried until his last breath. He never saw his homeland again. He never married. He never had children of his own. He lived in constant fear of discovery. Every knock on the door could be Roman assassins. Every new student could be a spy. The man who had led 70,000 rebels in open defiance now lived like a ghost. In his final years, he wrote a letter that was discovered centuries later. It read, "I died on that battlefield. What survived was not Spartacus the gladiator, but Spartacus the idea. And ideas, my friends, cannot be crucified. They cannot be defeated in battle. They can only grow quietly in the darkness until one day they emerge into the light and blind the tyrants who thought they had won." Modern implications. Today, historians debate whether Spartacus's survival would have truly changed history. Some argue that ideas travel regardless of their authors, that equality would have emerged eventually. But others point to the specific texts, the underground networks, the generations of quiet resistance that can be traced to that one decision. The decision to survive, to hide, to teach instead of fight. In our modern world, when oppressed people rise up against injustice, they often invoke ancient symbols. And among those symbols, the name Spartacus still resonates. Not because he won his war against Rome, but because he understood something profound. That the greatest rebellions are not won on battlefields. They are won in minds, in hearts, in the slow, patient work of changing what people believe is possible. The final lesson. If Spartacus had lived, his greatest victory would not have been military. It would have been philosophical. He would have transformed from warrior to teacher, from rebel leader to revolutionary thinker. He would have learned that breaking chains is not enough. You must break the idea that chains are necessary. You must break the belief that some humans are meant to serve others. This is the story that could have been. The story of a man who lost the battle, but won the war. Who traded the glory of a warrior's death for the quiet dignity of a teacher's life? And perhaps, in some way, this is what actually happened. Perhaps Spartacus's ideas did survive, not because he lived, but because his rebellion inspired something that could never die. The hunger for freedom, the rejection of tyranny, the simple, radical belief that all humans deserve dignity. These ideas did not start with Spartacus, but he became their symbol. Whether he died in battle or survived in exile, his name became synonymous with the fight against oppression. And that, perhaps, is the greatest victory of all. Not to live forever, but to inspire forever. The end. History remembers Spartacus as a rebel who died fighting Rome. But what if we have been telling the wrong story all along? What if the greatest trick Spartacus ever pulled was convincing the world he was dead? In every slave who dreams of freedom, in every person who stands against injustice, in every voice that refuses to be silenced, Spartacus lives. Not as a man, but as an idea. An idea that can never be crucified, never be conquered, never be forgotten. And that is how a Thracian gladiator became immortal.